Hi and welcome to this video where we take you through the process of setting up and inputting filters into your questionnaire using the QPSMR companion. Now just first of all, what a filter is. A filter in terms of your questionnaire is where you want to select only certain people to answer a particular question or a variable, and in terms of tables it will be where you're actually filtering certain people to answer the table or go into the table rather than allow the table to be based on all respondents. For the purposes of this video, we're going to just focus on specifying filters to questions so that only certain people are actually asked a particular question in a survey. Now, in this particular survey, I've already got 4 questions set up. You can see there's question 1, which is a single response question with the answers yes and no. Do you own a bicycle? Question 2 is an integer asking people how many kilometers they cycle each week. And question 3 is gender, or there's a gender question followed by an age question. So there's just 4 questions, and we're going to use these questions as the basis of filters for some extra questions that we're going to add in. So let's say first of all that we want to add a question and only ask it of people who own a bicycle. So the way we would do that would be to insert a filter entry, which we might call something like FQ1. We could call it bicycle owner or something like that. So we'll call it FQ1 in this case because it's coming from question 1. And we're going to insert a test where from question 1 we pick one value, and the value we're going to pick is yes. Now you can see there's some other options down here. I could pick people who said not to, which would in a sense be the same thing, but obviously it's better to pick people who said yes. People who didn't answer the question, I could pick a range of answers. If I had a range of answers here, wouldn't really make sense picking people who pick yes or no. Or it could be less than or greater than a particular value, but we'll look at some of those in a minute. So I'm going to pick the yes answer, and that now is a filter that I've specified, and there it's dropped into my worksheet here as FQ1, and you can see the text is Q1 is yes. Now I could edit that piece of text down here. I could change that if I wanted to by saying all who own a bicycle, for example, so it makes a little bit more sense, and obviously save that. So I can change that to something a bit more meaningful, but that text there of Q1 is yes was automatically generated by the QPSMR companion. Now if I want to use that filter on a question, I might add a question at the end here now where I use that filter. So I'm entering a new question which we'll call question 3. I'm going to allow multi-coding, and I'm going to put the text here. So I'm going to make it single, actually, make it single. And the text here is, how long have you owned a bicycle? So we're only asking this people who own a bicycle. And then we can just go to the responses in the usual way and add up to 1 year, up to 2 years, 2 to 5 years, more than 5 years. So they're my responses for that particular question. And then to apply a filter to the question, I can just come out of here, go back to my question, and in the filters, I shouldn't have done that, in the filters options here, I can apply a question filter. There's only one to choose from the list, that's FQ1, and apply that, and sure enough, FQ1 is now applied to that question. If we go back to question 3, you'll see that there's a tick in the filters box to indicate that a filter has been applied. There's also a tick in the responses box to indicate that we've got responses for this question already. Alright, so let's put a simple filter on question 3. Now there's another way of defining filters. The other way of defining filters is to actually use some syntax, and that I think generally, if you're a regular user of QPS, is probably a better way to go. It takes a little bit more learning, but I think it has some advantages. So that filter we had at FQ1 there, if we go to that we done by going into tests and inserting all of the definition there by selecting from a menu. The alternative way of doing it, if I just remove this for a minute, that will take away the definition for FQ1, so it has now no definition. The easier way to do that, I think, once you've learnt it, is to type Q1/1, which means answer 1 at question 1. And again, that text comes back as I've re-entered it, and we could edit that as all who own a bicycle. So it's very easy once you've learnt the syntax here to apply that. And indeed, the syntax that is used in filters is the same syntax that you will be using if you define any variables in QPS. The same logic is used, such as Q1/1 or 1.2 would mean in the range of 1 to 2, and so on. So that's done a simple filter there. So I've just repeated that filter, but by typing in some syntax rather than doing it through a menu. Now let's do something a little bit more complicated. So I now want to insert a new filter. I'm going to call this FQ1X. So this is an additional FQ1Q2, let's call it. FQ1Q2, which is going to come from question 1 and question 2. So now I'm going to just type in my definition here, and I'm going to type in Q1 or 1, and I can use the word and Q2 greater than 50. So this is people now who cycle over 50 kilometers each week. They own a bicycle and they cycle over 50 kilometers. Now we could have done that through tests yet again. We could have selected Q1 answer 1, and then we could have added that a new test after that from question 2, and here you can see there's different tests when it comes from an integer. I could pick a range of answers here, so if I wanted to pick between 10 and 20 kilometers, I could put in 10 and 20 here, but actually all I want are people who are more than 50, and so I've done the same thing here through menus rather than actually typing in the syntax. And you can see what it does for you here is sort of generate that syntax for you. So it's over 3 lines, said Q1/1 and Q2/greater 50. So it's doing the syntax for you. You'll note it puts a dollar on the front of that. That's actually absolutely optional. You haven't got to put that dollar in if you just type it into the window. You'll also see it here, but again, you haven't got to type that dollar in. And you'll also note that it's changed the word and to a dot. And in QPS, an and is a dot, and or is a plus sign, which can be confusing. But that's what you're going to get used to if you're going to actually use a syntax. But you can just use the words and or interchangeably as well, which is probably a bit more logical. If you wanted to switch that filter from and to or, you can just click on this here, and that will change the test so that it would pick people who are Q1 answer 1, which is people who own a bicycle, or people who cycle greater than 50 kilometers. Now that's not what we want here. That doesn't make sense, because only the people who answered question 2 answered yes at question 1 anyway, so it wouldn't be particularly appropriate. So we've got and in there, and we can save that, and there's our new filter FQ1Q2, and we could add another question in now which used that filter. So we can apply that filter FQ1Q2. If we want to, there's tools in here to apply a filter to a whole block of questions, and that will be covered in preparing your questionnaire in a subsequent video. All right, let's go with something a little bit more complex now and just look at setting up an even more complex filter. And this time I'm going to take the gender and age, and I'm going to pick males who are over 50 or females that are over 60. So I want here, if you can visualize this, it's actually a bracketed or expression that we'd probably want to put in here. If you think of the logic, it would be something like male, gender 1, which is male, and age greater than 50, or, but with a bracket around the first bit, female, which is gender number 2, code 2, and age greater than 60. So let's try and specify that filter and see how it looks. Let's put another filter entry in. So we'll call this older as the definition. Now again, I could just type that in if I wanted to, but again I can do it through the menus if I want to. So I could go into here, insert a test, which was gender, answer 1, okay. Insert another test, which was age more than 50. And I'm going to carry on now. It's done the and for me here. I'm going to carry on and do the females, and then I'm going to just amend that slightly once I've done it. So let's pick the females, one value here, females, and I want another test which is age more than 60. So that's picking the people I want, but that's not quite what we want here. I actually want to change that to an or, but that still wouldn't be right because MRDC as a QPS here would get very confused between ands and ors, because it would sort of read that in the order it comes. So it would say gender a 1 and age greater than 50, or gender a 2 and age greater than 60. And so what we need are some brackets round this part. So we just highlight that there and put brackets around it by selecting the higher option to the left there, and doing the same here. And now we've got a very nice bracketed expression that says I want males who are over 50, or alternatively they're females and they're over 60. And this can be represented, if you look at the order tab here, you'll see some graphical representation of that to see what it is you've selected, which can make it a bit easier to understand. And of course you're allowed to use brackets to an even greater depth than that. I'm not going to do that in this video here, that's for another time I think. Alright, so we've now got that definition. If we go back to the filter, you'll see this is what we could have typed in. We could have actually done this all in syntax, with or without the dollars, using dot for and plus for or, but we could have just typed that expression straight in. So let's remove it again and just have a look at what that looks like. If we were to type it ourselves, we would probably type something like gender 1 and age greater than 50, or bracket gender 2 and age greater than 60. So that will do exactly the same thing, and we might edit that rather garbled text down there and say males over 50 stroke females over 60, and make the text a little bit more readable than it was there. So you have a choice whether you do it through menus or whether you do it with syntax. So let's close that out. And of course now I can specify a question if I want to. Let's go to the bottom here, insert a question, and I'm going to change this question. Do you mainly cycle for exercise? So we're asking older people whether they cycle for exercise, and the responses here are just yes and no. Okay, and if we want that filter, we can go into the filters, apply a question filter, and click that older filter, and that will just pick up the people we want, which will mean now that once we've done that, when it comes to data entry, the only people who will get asked question 4 will those who fulfill that condition called older, which are the males over 50 and the females over 60. So we've had a good look at setting up filters here. There's some other things that will be worth noting that we haven't covered. So let's just make up another filter here quickly and look at some of the tests that we can do. So if we were to insert a test here from a single response question, we looked at that earlier and saw that you can choose a single response, you can choose a range of responses. If there were 10 responses here, you could pick the first 4, for example. You can make that the opposite to what you've selected by clicking on the negative button. You can click blank so that the question isn't answered, or negative blank so that the question is answered with some answer. And you can choose equal to, less than, and or more than. So that's the test that we could do on a single response question. On an integer there, we just had a look at that just now. The test we can do again, we can make it negative. We can pick one particular value. So we could pick people, for example, who do exactly 100 kilometers per week. Unlikely, but that's the sort of thing you could select. We've already done more than, and we could obviously do less than by the same sort of methodology. Or we could pick a range and say we want people between one value and another. So there's a whole range of tests in there that you can do. If you want to do a negative test and define it yourself, you can do that. So we could go in here and we could choose the negative of this, so people who didn't say yes. And in here you can see what the syntax looks like. It's Q1, N1, or the whole word not one. We could have defined that as Q1 / not one, and that can be a little bit confusing because the not comes after the slash, so it's not like and and or, which you sort of use as conjunctions, as it were. The not comes after the slash, and that will pick up people who didn't give answer 1, and you can abbreviate that to N1 as well. Oops, I missed out the N there. It is not yes. So N1 works perfectly well there in that particular case. So that's the definition of filters and applying them. They're very like specifying variables, and they'll also be useful learning when it comes to specifying variables, because the syntax and the way that you do it is pretty much the same. It's also the same when it comes to tables. If you do tables in QPSMR Insight, the way you specify those filters is exactly the same. There's just one further shortcut you might want to know about, which is create filter entries from responses. So here I could click on question 1 and it will automatically generate me a variable called FQ1_1 if I just select it by this methodology and create filter, and it tells me one filter is created, and if I look up the top you'll see that FQ1_1 was created for me. So a little bit of time saving there if you want to create perhaps a number of filters from one particular question. So that completes this video on filters. Looking at applying filters as blocks of questions is covered in the video which is about managing your questionnaire.